Every week, Surfing the MASH Tsunami brings you three major stories from the world of steatotic liver disease. This weekend, we're bringing you each of these stories separately so you can listen over a shorter, discrete period of time. Hope you enjoy them.
For the last 5 years, MASLD stakeholders, whether manufacturers, trial sites, providers, payers, patients, or investors, have turned to Surfing the MASH Tsunami to keep track of drug and device development, epidemiology, public health initiatives, and practice patterns. This weekend, we are sharing the three main sections from our episode 7. Roger will provide more information after these notes from our sponsors.
Surfing the MASH Tsunami is sponsored by these healthcare-related organizations.
Regeneron is a leading biotechnology company that invents, develops, and commercializes life-transforming medicines for serious diseases. Founded and led by physician scientists, their unique ability to repeatedly translate science into medicine has led to numerous approved treatments and product candidates in development, most of which were homegrown in their laboratories. They are shaping the next frontier of medicine with data-powered insights from the Regeneron Genetics Center and pioneering genetic medicine platforms, enabling them to identify innovative targets and complementary approaches to potentially treat diseases like obesity and MASH.
LiverRight and the LiverRight Scanning Network. LiverRight is America's first virtual specialty clinic for liver disease, offering adults in all 50 states video appointments and helping GI practices and health systems triage and treat the swelling numbers of patients seeking MASLD and MASH testing. LiverRight offers same-week video visits and accepts insurance. For more information, contact LiverRight. That's liver then R-I-G-H-T as if one word, at www.liverright.com.
Tawazun Health, your partner in global liver health innovation. At Tawazun Health, we specialize in providing small or large-scale access to FibroScan examinations for liver health-focused early detection, clinical trials, independent research, and collaborative projects with clinicians and FibroScan providers, now in over 30 countries around the globe. As industry-leading experts, we design and deliver high-quality FibroScan services because we know that accurate, high-quality, reliable data drives better outcomes. To learn about Tawazun Health or our sister lifestyle app, mylife365.me, click the Tawazun Health link on the SurfingMASH homepage. This week, our roundtable on drug development includes Roger, Jörn, Louise, and hepatologists and key opinion leaders Naeem Al-Khouri and Sven Francque.
The final segment of this week's episode wraps up our drug development roundtable. The discussion focuses on PPARs, genetic medicines, other emerging drug classes. Sven uses the example of pan-PPAR lanifibranor to explore the idea that drug therapies can have an impact on the liver independent of the effect on fibrosis regression. And we go on to discuss emerging drugs in development and their modes of action. One theme is that over time, we may see prescribers consider using different therapies to address metabolic versus liver-specific effects, often one in combination with the other.
I mean, the one class of drug we haven't discussed are the PPARs. And I mean, we have Sven on us here. And I think I saw a recent press release, Sven, on the study progress for the lanifibranor study.
Yeah, that's now fully recruited.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, that's going to be also an important, another MOA that's still around and will then read out after the patients have gone through the treatment period.
Yeah, and I think, and that's why I also alluded earlier on the importance of the mode of action, also of the FGF21s, and the fact that it's not just about fibrosis regression. All the additional effects are very important to understand the complete potential benefit of a compound. And also the PPARs, they do have pleiotropic effects, and that translate into many positive actions that go beyond just fibrosis regression. They induce, of course, fibrosis regression, which is important, but many aspects, and especially the effects on the vasculature and portal hypertension, are of potential great interest.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please, Sven?
Well, what we have seen, and it was also recently published in JAP reports, is that with that kind of compounds, I mean, one of the things is that you have in disease progression of MASLD, you have vascular changes quite early in disease. In fact, it's not just something for the advanced F3 and then F4 population. It occurs already quite early in disease, and that's probably also one of the reasons why the pattern of portal hypertension is a little bit different if you compare it to viral hepatitis-related cirrhosis or alcohol-related cirrhosis, for example. That has probably to do with some of the effects of the adipose tissue liver axis and also specifically on what is happening pre-sinusoidally and in the liver sinusoids in MASLD, which is also different than in other diseases. And so drugs that specifically target these effects, they might have a superior added value, especially when you get to the more advanced diseases, not necessarily F4, but also F3, where those aspects become more predominantly important than in very early disease.
I have got a question, because there's a drug that did excite me in a class, and I don't know about this class of drugs, so I've got two gurus here. Armacol by Galmed Pharmaceuticals. It's an SCD1 inhibitor. Now, from my little bit of reading about that sounds like a really exciting class of drugs, because it also has beneficial effects for cancer. What do you guys think or know about it? And I know it's in early trials, but it's one that's new to me.
There has been a phase 2 trial, but the data are a little bit difficult to analyze because it has not completed the whole phase 2 pre-post biopsy. In the classical trial, there were some changes along the trial. Still some hints of efficacy there. One of the main questions always is whether that will be powerful enough to induce not only regression of fibrosis. I mean, regression of fibrosis is not just the aim of the treatment, it's also a sign of significant improvement in the liver. It's like when you have sustained effect on liver stiffness, it means something beneficial for the liver that is just beyond the simple parameter that you are looking at. So that's probably also what you see with Amcol, but as a standalone, without little effect on the metabolic milieu in which this disease develops, that's probably something that is more a second line or something on top of it than as a standalone drug. That's also what we've seen with other components that have very interesting modes of action that are really in the heart of the pathophysiology of the disease, but probably a little bit isolatedly liver-centric in the context of a disease that is not just a liver disease, because it obviously develops in the context of metabolic dysfunction, which is an important driver. Of course, the metabolic dysfunction as a driver is not enough. You also need a vulnerable liver that is not capable of coping with that metabolic pressure. But if it's a little bit too isolated liver targeted, then it's not always powerful enough as a standalone to have an impact or substantial impact, and it probably needs a combination approach. So I guess that kind of drugs is very good if you have, first of all, a metabolic control with insufficient results. Then those drugs are probably better positioned and have more chances of also achieving efficacy. And that is also one of the, to me, powerful things about resmetirom, where you could make the same reasoning, that is very liver-centric. Despite that, it was powerful enough without weight loss or substantial weight loss in most of the patients, without improving glycemic control, etc., etc. Despite not having these strong effects on metabolic dysfunction, it still was powerful enough to induce MASH regression and fibrosis regression. But many pure liver-centered drugs or liver-targeted drugs will probably, as a standalone, not be efficacious in the vast majority of patients, probably in a subgroup of patients, but they will probably be more efficient in patients in whom you achieve, first of all, some metabolic improvement, and you add that on top of that.
Fantastic. Thank you. I understand it a little bit better now.
I fully agree with Sven's comment. The interesting aspect for me is that we're seeing drugs come through that are weight neutral and could be used potentially as a combination partner with a drug that has liver-centric effect and some liver effects. So I think that's the true classification we're going to be doing in the end, combining weight neutral with weight reducing drugs.
I think that's a really good comment, because it takes me back to viral hepatitis C. We would use the right drug for the right person for the right reason. And a lot of people didn't necessarily want to go through mass weight loss to achieve better outcomes, which we saw a lot in Shearing House product, for example, so against Pegasus. Therefore, tailoring the drugs that suit the people. There are lots of people who don't want to lose their curves. They don't want to fulfill the stereotype of slim people. So using the right drug for the right person for the right reason that gets them metabolically healthy is definitely a better management strategy. It's whether or not health services can support that more particular style of medicine management. It's person-centric, I suppose, would be a better phrase than personalized medicine in its concept. But no, I think that's a great idea of using drugs that are weight neutral for those who really don't want to lose their curves. Lots of men don't, lots of women don't. Look back in history and curvy was the sign of fertility around the world. So the world isn't going to necessarily change to the stereotype that we have today. And I think offering drugs that support more stereotypes or more people's body shapes is better.
Yeah, and I think, Louise, you're right. Personalized medicine is about those aspects, but also on the, I would say, more medical heterogeneity of the patients too, because we do have patients with a lot of overweight and very minor liver disease, and vice versa, those with, at first look, very subtle metabolic dysfunction, but still a severe liver disease, and we have the whole spectrum in between. And that's also something that we will have to take into account in the choice of our drugs. Once we have more and more drugs with different modes of action, and hopefully also a better understanding of how it's in the specific individual patient the most important mechanisms of disease are, then we can also take that into account to have another level of personalized medicine.
Point well made. And our friend Mike Patel was on last week talking about tailored therapy as, in his mind, one of the key goals of every patient advocate is to articulate that patients need the therapies that jibe with their lifestyle and their point of view, and also make them healthier at the same time. So we're there. Sven, do you have one more drug after PPARs that you'd like to discuss into further up the stage in development?
No, not for the time being. I think we already covered quite a spectrum. One of the things that is important are the drugs that target genetic backgrounds of the disease. That's also an interesting avenue to see how far we will get with that. There are several ones, of course, most obviously PPAR, but also other gene-targeted approaches that are for sure interesting. You also have some more downstream targets, again, in the immunological space that are also interesting and promising. You remember that we had Sinapriviroc some time ago that was not convincing, unfortunately, but I think still that it comes back to the same reasoning I made about other drugs, that probably the metabolic environment was untouched and that translated in minor improvements in the vast majority of the patients, but still also mechanisms targeting the inflammatory and immunological pathways are also further tested. And I think in the context where we will have much more powerful tools that will help us control the metabolic environment in which this disease develops, that kind of drugs will be very helpful to target those patients that, despite some metabolic improvements, still have significant liver disease. But it's a little bit more down the road and still a few years before we will have those drugs.
Good point from Sven. Let me add, Sven mentioned the genetics. There's been some data on mitochondrial targeting drugs. The uncouplers are an old story, but there's been some data presented with liver-directed effects and more, let's call them safe uncouplers. That's, of course, still an interesting combination, some weight loss effects, but losing that energy and some additional targets. There's even early drug development coming in. It's clearly, from my perspective, that we haven't seen we don't have the complete package of drugs we need to treat all these patients affected yet. So if you're coming into the field with an attractive mechanism, I think, albeit all the positive effects of GLP-1 and resmetirom being approved, there is still room to further understand the mechanism and subgroups of patients in need for treatment and actually start these trials. And maybe easier these days compared to earlier days where we're still uncertain about the endpoints to a certain degree.
That makes a lot of sense. The only class of drugs that we've not talked about that I can think of that's proceeding into phase 3 at this point are the FASN inhibitors, right? I think denifenstat, is trying to start up phase 3 right now, or starting up phase 3. Any comments on that group?
Yeah, I think the data was convincing. The efficacy, safety aspects are positive, and it's yet again a different mechanism that's more metabolically disruptive compared to what we've seen with other drugs, because the changes in lipid metabolism are more pronounced. And it makes a lot of sense based on the pathophysiology of intrahepatic lipid metabolism, and it speaks to the class of drug that you can alter by altering hepatic lipid metabolism, which in the end resmetirom is doing. You can achieve such a profound effect, but I think we need to see more data.
No, I completely agree. Jörn said it all.
Okay. So we said at the beginning we could probably discuss this topic for hours, and so far we've only been at it for an hour and 10, but I think that's probably enough for today. Any closing thoughts or comments from anybody on anything we've missed here, or anything in the conversation that you found particularly striking?
I'm going to make a comment, but you started the beginning of the afternoon by talking about Stephen, and I think some of the medications we've discussed today, he mentioned for the first time several years ago, and I was struck by the excitement in his voice at that time. I am not a medical background physician for medicines and things like that, but even got me excited about drugs. I'm more about the clinical pathway, the design of how we instrument all of this from all of this great work that you guys and these guys are doing. But I'm just struck by the work, the amount of drugs that we're discussing today that I could never have pronounced in those days, but he would come in and just roll off with such excitement that these were coming into the field. So I think it is a great episode to play for Stephen, because that's why we got into this and we kept it running. And it's a shame he's not here to see that excitement, but that excitement in his voice will never leave me.
Very true. Well spoken, Louise. Missing his enthusiasm and positive energy in this context too, obviously. But he'd be proud of what we're doing here today and how the field has evolved.
Yeah, he really marked the field. So this having in honor of him is very rightfully so.
And you got me, Louise. Nothing ever catches my throat. And I've been coughing all day, and that hasn't caught my throat. That caught my throat. Yeah, I think he would be exceptionally proud.
On behalf of the surfers, our guests, and our sponsors, Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, LiverRight, and Tawazun Health, thanks for joining us this week.
Please join us again next week when we continue our roundtables on the steatotic liver disease think tank and advances in drug development, and are joined by an outstanding SLD newsmaker.
And until next week, stay safe, surf on, and we'll see you on podcast. Bye-bye now.